Good evening, everybody. Welcome to a special Comic Art Spotlight, probably the most requested Comic Art Spotlight I've had since we got started doing these shows. As you know, that we've talked to a lot of collectors and we've talked to some dealers and a lot of art reps, but the most requested interview that I've ever gotten, it happens at least once or twice a month, is to get collector and artist Scott Williams on the show. And as everybody knows, my schedule's always been so crazy, I've just never had the chance to ask Scott. Well, I was chatting with Dino, and Dino said, hey, I can ask Scott for you. And I said, well, if you can do it for me, I would appreciate that because I need all the help I can get as far as reaching out to guests. And he did it, and Scott agreed. And so here we are this evening. I'm going to bring Scott in right now because, like I said, it's been a year of people asking me to get Scott on screen. Hey, Scott, how you doing this evening?
Hey, Bill, how are you?
Absolutely fantastic. We had a very busy week.
I had no idea that I was requested. I thought this was just kind of like, well, we're running down to the bottom of the barrel. Let's see if we can get like Scott to come on and chat about his art collection. I had no clue that anyone like knew or cared about what my deal was.
Oh no, it's honestly, since I started doing these, they're all like, you got to get Scott on the show. And for me, it was just, I was taking the low-hanging fruit. Whoever would come to me and asked to be on the show, I'm like, all right, because I don't have if I had a secretary, I would have asked you 12 months ago. But I was, people would come to me and I would just put them on the schedule. I'd still get asked, when's Scott going to be on the show? And I said, sometime soon. I promise it'll happen. And but I just kept having everybody come to me, and it just made everything easier. And Dino finally kind of nudged me in the right direction. So I'm really glad that he did, because honestly, I've been wanting to have this chat for a while, because I think we've only ever emailed. I don't think we've ever had a chance to talk.
I've never met you. We've probably been in the same building before, because I think I know you've been to San Diego, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Okay, so I've been to San Diego every year since 1980, except for one, and that was like 1983, I think. So we've obviously last year too, because that was 2020, which will never be discussed again. But no, so we've obviously been in the same place. We just never hooked up. But I have watched at least bits and pieces of a bunch of the shows that you guys have been running, especially once kind of COVID kicked in and you went to this alternate platform, and good on you for doing that. I think it kind of gave people something to do, especially with conventions gone, with COVID. It gave people an outlet. It gave people an opportunity to put faces to collections and faces to names that maybe they would have only interacted through either CAF or other platforms. So I think it was good for the hobby and for collecting original art for you. And I will be 100% honest. My participation on CAF had started to diminish somewhat, from the standpoint that over the last couple of years, I noticed there seemed, at least in my perception, there seemed to have been a bit of a shift away from CAF usage, CAF views, the interaction, and seemed to be kind of migrating towards other parts of social media. So I wasn't feeling like, if I was going to post something, new art that either was a piece from my collection or some of my own art that I had produced, I was getting, frankly, more bang for my buck from other avenues of social media.
Sure.
Even though I still think CAF is one of the best platforms out there for sharing and showing original comic art and interactions. I really like it as a platform and the services that it renders. But I was definitely feeling like something isn't lining up. I seem to be sort of moving away from CAF a little bit, even though I was kind of rooting for it. And then I think once you kind of got the Comic Art Live thing going, I think it's kind of like kickstarting the engine a little bit more. Again, it gives people more things to talk about, different ways of viewing art and interacting with other collectors and whatnot. So I think it was really smart on your part to kind of do this segue and capture maybe something that wasn't there before.
Right. No, I completely agree. I mean, there was a point in time, like you were saying, it was about 2 years ago, where I was feeling the same thing. I was feeling the collectors and the users of the site. There was this draw pulling them away from CAF. Instagram was getting too big.
Yeah.
All their friends were on Facebook, and it was just really difficult to keep their attention there. But the thing was, the traffic on CAF and it was always there, but the perceptions were changing. So even though it felt like people weren't interacting with the site, the same number of users and the same number of artwork views were happening every single day. But when you're getting pinged by Facebook on your phone, 20 times a day, when somebody likes or comments on a post, it just felt like things were moving away. And I had reached a point where I was really considering getting another job. I'm like, I'm going to just do CAF and Coast, because it's just getting to that point where maybe I can't compete with these other social platforms. And then the pandemic rolled around, and that really changed everything for me as well. I mean, not at first, but after I saw how we could engage with users differently, and especially through these interviews and getting to know everybody. There's so many people that I've emailed with that I had never met at a show. And so if I hadn't met them, you could figure at least 80 or 90% of the people in the audience who are watching these things live hadn't met them either. So, and you see that in the chat. I don't know if you have I think you can't see the comments, right? You're on your phone.
I can't see anything. No.
All right. Well, that's the thing on YouTube is, there's a lot of live comments going on. I'll pull up questions and things, but I saw it happening there. And once I saw the interactivity happening through the chat, where people were just talking amongst themselves while they're watching me talk, that's when I realized, wow, there's really something good happening here. We are bringing.
Well, I was, like I said, I was and am, rooting for you, because I think I've been a part of CAF. I've been a member of CAF since, I don't know, 2004, 5, or but from pretty way back. I'm not sure how far back I was, but from pretty way far back. So August,
like I said, 2004.
2004. And when did it start up?
2003.
Okay, so not one of the first guys there, but definitely I found it eventually.
Yeah, no, like the first 1600. So you were very early. Anybody who's under the first 10,000 was a very early adopter of what we were doing. So
well, you filled a space. There was nothing else like it. There still isn't.
Right. Yeah, I know. I did. Well, that when we built it was just I wanted to make something as a collector I wanted, because there wasn't anything out there, and so we just kind of built it based on that. I talked with a few collector friends who were also programmers, and we just built the site as we wanted it, and so it kind of filled that need, but it didn't have all the social trappings in it that eventually everybody else had. And
but the only way it would have worked is if the person building the site was also had their foot into the original art collecting hobby, right? There's no way that someone coming in and just saying, well, without having sort of any insight into what original art is all about or the nature of it, would be able to build a site that would sort of cater to the needs of the collectors. And I think having you as being the head guy to make it go, I think that was key.
I agree. I mean, that's why I didn't treat it as a business early on. I just treated it as something fun. It was not meant to become a career for me. And it just evolved into that as the needs of the hobby grew. Dealers wanting me to build sites and all that. But, we shouldn't be talking about me. We're here tonight to talk about you. I've actually got somebody who I might be doing an interview, or they might be interviewing me on the channel in a few weeks. So we can learn more about me on that show. But Scott, so you probably haven't seen a lot of you've seen a few, but we always kind of start out with the origin stories as to how you got started as far as comic art collecting. But of course, I'm sure yours kind of goes even further back before you started collecting original comic art. So,
yeah, to a certain extent, probably most of your origin stories, I'm sure everybody started off as comic book fans. Actually, has anybody come on with an origin story that says, no, I never read comics, but I saw original art somewhere and all of a sudden I was hooked? It just doesn't work that way.
Not a single person, not one.
And I don't think that will ever be the case. I think it's sort of a given that you've got to be a comic fan, and I was, and had older brothers and sisters that read comics. So there were comics lying around that they bought that I read, and then I eventually picked up the habit and was buying comics from. I probably really started seriously buying comics around age 11 and 12, which is pretty par for the course. Some people pick up or dabble in reading comics prior to that, but 11 and 12 seems to sort of be like a bit of a magic age for getting the comic book bug. But that said, I was also a military brat, so I moved around a lot. And at one point, my dad got he was in the Air Force, and he got stationed in Hawaii, and so I was pretty far away from any sense of conventions. I would have been too young, anyways, during those years to have had any sense of doing conventions or wanting to, or even knowing about conventions for that matter. So the knowledge that there was such a thing as original art just never really occurred to me. I don't know how most people sort of assume that comics are created, but the idea of owning and collecting original art was completely foreign to me. Even though probably by my mid-teens, I was already starting to think in terms of I want to do comics as a career. So I knew about the drawing of comics and the inking of comics, and I knew roughly how it was done, but the idea of owning art and collecting it from the artists that inspired me didn't occur to me until a buddy of mine, Richard Martinez, who's a pretty well-known collector, long-time collector in the hobby, and he was just a couple of years older than me. When I was by late high school, he was starting to collect art, and we had the same taste, and he was collecting the same stuff. He was collecting art from the same comics that we both cherished, and so it was a lot of the Neal Adams stuff and Barry Windsor Smith, Conan art, and gosh, he would bring home Bernie Wrightson Swamp Thing pages and just the kind of creme de la creme type stuff, and it had never dawned on me that's. Wait, you bought that? You own this now? This is like yours? And, oh, okay. So by the time I was out of high school and was really thinking seriously about a career in comics, I started putting kind of two and two together. It's like, I need to go and show people my artwork. And in the meantime, there's a place that not only where you can show your artwork to potential employers, but they have cool comic stuff that you could buy, including maybe some original art. So we targeted San Diego. That was 1980. And that was my first San Diego con. So even though I had seen original art in the flesh from my friend Richard, that was the first show where I went with a target and a goal. And one was to show my artwork to try to get in the business, which I was still nowhere near ready for. I was still like 5 years away from getting into the business. But that was the first convention that I went to with money in my pocket. I think I went, this was flying from Hawaii to San Diego, which was expensive for a poor college student. I was dirt poor. And I came, I think, with $1,000 in my pocket, which was just like a king's ransom worth of money at that point. I saved all year long, and I was going, but I was still into comic books too. So I had like about half of that money budgeted for comic books, upgrading my collection, which is like, what a freaking idiot I am. But at the time, that seemed important at the time. If I could do it all over again, we make young and foolish mistakes. But I had, half the money also budgeted for original art, and immediately found a dealer. There were a couple of comic art dealers, but the one that really got my attention was a guy named Sandy Blatt. And again, a bunch of the old time collectors and dealers in the audience right now know who he is. And he specialized in a lot of this, again, the artists that I really admired. So the Neal Adams stuff and the Bernie Wrightson stuff, and gosh, he even had like some Frazettas, and I mean, just, all kinds of, great stuff. And so that was the convention where I saw a stack of art, flipped through it. I found a Neal Adams Deadman cover that I bought. That was my very first purchase. And he also had like a great Neal Adams Batman page, bought that. And then the rest of my money all went to the comics. So just from a dollars and cents standpoint, even though we don't do this for money, and I certainly didn't get into art for any monetary reason. There was no hint or assumption that going to go up in value. I was buying it just because it seemed so important to me. I mean, it was a way to be inspired. It was a way to like see in physical form what the ink looked like on the page and what the size difference was between the printed comic and the original art, and the original art being 11 by 17, the printed comic being whatever the size is. And seeing those differences and seeing how something reduced in size and just, again, just sort of, trying to absorb the inspiration that was coming off those pages and using that to my advantage as far as, advancing my own artwork. And the other thing that I remember, and I'm rambling, but the other thing that I remember very distinctly about that first convention that I bought those two pieces of art was sitting in what was a terrible, paltry, small corner of the then San Diego Convention Center, and sitting in front of a table that had John Byrne, Terry Austin, George Perez, Bill Sienkiewicz, might have been Howard Chaykin, a couple other guys, and watching them draw the entire convention and actually getting a couple sketches. I got a couple of John Byrne sketches. This was like sort of my last art purchase. A couple of John Byrne sketches, a Bill Sienkiewicz sketch, but just sitting there and watching them draw and watching sort of the magic happen right in front of me. And
oh, how lucky!
From that point on, I was smitten. And this was if you check your calendar, this was 1980. And I remember John Byrne had photocopies of Days of Future Past issues to come, right? So X-Men 137 had just come out, the death of Jean Grey Phoenix. So just from a time frame standpoint, just to kind of see where I was historically, that had just come out. And I got to kind of flip through like entire full-size photocopies of Days of Future Past, and he just kind of dumped on his table, and anybody walking by could just like flip through it to look at it, and he just like, yeah, this is like the next couple issues, check it out.
He was giving it all away.
He was giving it all away. I don't think this was obviously pre-social media, so there was no security issues. I mean, nobody's gonna pay any attention to me if I like blab about it. Who's gonna listen and who cares, right? So,
right. Yeah. Right. Any pictures you were going to take were going to be too fuzzy. You couldn't make out any details.
Yeah. That's for sure.
But hey, I think, I was browsing through your CAF gallery before earlier today, and one of the pictures was from, I believe, that con.
Yeah, that's
right
the
there.
one. That's Sandy. That's the guy that I was just talking about.
Yep.
And the funny thing is, I don't know why with that in this picture, I'm holding up the copy of the comic of the original art that I bought. Right. So that's the Dead Man 213 issue that I'm holding up. I don't know why I wasn't holding up the original art. I'm thinking maybe this was like the next day and I'd come back and I'd already bought the cover and I probably wanted to make some sort of historical document showing that this is where I bought it from and this was the comic. So I must have just had that as a consolation prize. But yeah, this was, and you can see the booth, and then you can see like Neal Adams covers there in the background. You can see Bernie Wrightson, like creepy and eerie artwork back there. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff there. I think he's holding up a Boris painting, a Conan painting. So yeah, this was me looking way younger. I was all 20 years old. I probably don't even look recognizable to anybody who's seeing me now, but those were the good old days.
Wow. Yeah, that back wall is pretty impressive.
Yeah, it was. And like I said, there weren't a lot of guys that were doing original art that at least were set up at that time that had the art that I was interested in. And I had a pretty specific, goal of the type of art that I was interested in.
Wow. That would have been a show to go to. I can't even imagine what that would have been like.
Oh, it was like Christmas and birthday all wrapped up into one. That was like a great week. And like I said, I've been back ever since. It's just such a great experience.
Now, being 1980 and you were targeting art and comics, were you running into other art collectors, or did you feel like the art dealers' tables were really busy?
I didn't know anybody. I would strike up conversations with any of the dealers that I was potentially buying something from. And I was with my buddy Richard. We went together, and so we kind of hung out together. And if he saw something if he saw something that he thought I would be interested in, he'd call me over. If I saw something he'd be interested in, I'd call him over. And we were both doing the same thing, looking for art, looking for comics to kind of fill out our collection. I didn't make any like lifelong friends or anything from those real early shows. The networking stuff and making friends, that kind of came later. You start to find out how important that is in this hobby, networking and making friends. It was finding the right art is always hard. It was hard back then. It's hard now. There are more tools at your disposal now than there were back then. I mean, places like CAF and being able to talk to other collectors and dealers without racking up like huge phone bills, because nobody very young remembers, but long distance phone calling, phone bills were ridiculous back in the day. So yeah, it was harder back then, but it definitely opened up Pandora's box from a hobby and a collecting and a spending standpoint. Most of the time in the early years when I was collecting, I was dirt poor. I was either a starving student or I was a starving artist. And it really wasn't until later years that I started having the ability to up my game a little bit as far as what I was able to afford and have access to. And some of that was a function of having the funds to be able to pay for art, but some of it was because I started becoming better connected and get the really good stuff, the stuff that is kind of gets pulled out from the portfolio underneath the table. Like, you want to check this out? That kind of stuff comes from building relationships and making friends and having people looking out for you and stuff. And that's definitely a big benefit and a big plus to where things are now.
So did you see yourself, back then, were you really only buying art, at least early on, just at the shows, or were these connections that you were making it so that you could buy art in between shows? Because like you said, you had to save up so much just to get, go to that show.
It was a once a year splurge. There was a thing called the CBG, the Comic Buyer's Guide, which was just a newspaper that would have classified ads in the back or ads throughout the newspaper. And there were some dealers and some well-known dealers who are still around today who would advertise in those. The problem was, I was poor, so I really couldn't have afforded stuff even if I'd have wanted to, and B, living in Hawaii, I think those newspapers were delivered like surface mail, so I'd get them like 2 weeks after everybody else. So it was just like, by the time I would have gotten the newspapers, even if I'd have had the money to be able to buy art, it would have been too late, and all the good stuff would have been gone.
Yeah, but you were getting them just the same, though. So you wanted to
I was getting them just the same because I was still just kind of a dork and a nerd, and still into comics and still into a lot of the material that publication was aiming at. But as far as like building up my art collection, no, it was a very slow, kind of deliberate process over years and years where my collection kind of came to fruition.
So what point did you move from Hawaii back to the States?
Eventually, I could tell my work from a drawing standpoint was improving to the point where I thought I might have a chance of getting in the door. And I think it was the 1984 San Diego Comic-Con. I ran into my old buddy, Wills Portasio, who was a high school buddy who had gone to high school with me. And he had just gotten his first professional gig. He was inking Long Shot over Art Adams. And he didn't have a desire to ink for the long term, but in the short term, it was kind of a way to get his foot in the door. And he said, I'm dying here. I'm getting buried. Could you come and help? Could you come and just like be an assistant? And even though it wasn't really something that I had necessarily targeted to do from a career standpoint, being like an inking assistant, it certainly seemed like as good a way as any to kind of get my foot in the door and to be present in ways and with people where I could show my work as I continued to progress. And so in '85, I joined him in San Diego, and within like just a few months, working with his editors and with Marvel in general, I was starting to get like regular Marvel work as an inker, which was fine. It turned out I'm a better inker than I was a straight penciler. I can draw stuff, but I'm pretty slow. It's not to my economic advantage to draw really slow. I found out what I was good at and kind of stuck with it for the most part.
Yeah. Well, we already have enough slow pencilers in the business, right?
I would fit right in with that.
So, so I mean, to talk a little bit to that. So when you first started inking original art, I mean, did it feel really, familiar and fun? And did you think back to the art that you already owned and just think, wow, I'm actually getting to work on stuff that, I was enjoying collecting? And
yeah,
I mean, I'm sure you're looking at it as an artist, when you were buying the art, but man, that must have been a really fun feeling.
It was very surreal. Seeing art in front of me that was from my favorite artists, and then comparing the art that I was producing now professionally and trying to like pick it apart, trying to figure out like, okay, why does this stuff, that Frank Miller drew, why does it look, and Klaus Janson, why does it look like that? And then my stuff looks like this. Like where's the disconnect? Something's not, so it's probably not the greatest idea to compare yourself to other artists. You should probably be, if you're going to be in competition, you should be in competition with yourself to try to keep getting better and better. That should sort of be like job number one. Do the work, do it to the best of your ability, and try to keep getting better and better and better. If you keep putting the legends of the industry as either the make or break level for you, you're going to be struggling. You're going to be disillusioned. You're going to feel like you're never going to get anywhere. So, but having said that, it was still helpful to kind of see just how artwork looked on a page, and to realize it's, when you see it printed and it's colored and it's shrunk down, you don't realize that there are so many imperfections. So you can be a little bit more brave with, making mistakes, but doing it with purpose and knowing that you can clean it up. You can use like whiteout, or you can, use erasers, and you can do all kinds of things to make the page better to the point where it's ready for publication. And seeing the original art and seeing like messy stuff. I mean, I had like some Bill Sienkiewicz art that was just a mess, but it looked great, right? It had so much energy to it, and it was, it was very inspiring, and to see that I don't have to be so fussy and fastidious. Now I tend to work relatively pretty clean anyways, so that's kind of one of my style quirks. But at least it gave me the confidence to know that you can find places to kind of bust out and produce work that has energy, that doesn't have to be just perfect all the time. And to get a sense of what works and what doesn't.
Sure. Maybe I don't want to miss a question here. West asked, let's see, he said, Scott, have you ever bought any of your own artwork?
No. Nope. I don't know why I would. I've sold artwork that now seems like a mistake, or I've traded artwork that now seems like a mistake.
Right.
And some of that was, some of it's just a matter of timing. And most of the stuff that's like a mistake, honestly, if I just between you and me, I mean, the mistake is really like you sold it before you could maximize the dollar return, right? And so if you're selling your own artwork, that's really different than collecting artwork, right? So if I produce artwork and I sell it, that's part of the business. That's part of the making money part of it. I didn't get into collecting original art to make money. Now, it turns out, just through absolute blind luck, that a lot of the stuff that I'm interested in and that I collect has like shot up in value over the years. That's not my fault, and I make no apologies for it. But it certainly wasn't the reason I got into collecting art. It was for all the reasons that I just discussed for the last half hour. So yeah, I sold a bunch of my art. I've sold some art that I've collected that I just thought was, kind of past its prime or wasn't like doing it for me anymore, and I've sold it. And of course, like, a year or 2 or 5 years later, it's like, why did I sell that? It's like worth, way more. But, that's kind of the nature of the hobby. I think, if you've been around for any number of years, you've had artwork pass through your hands that maybe you wish you had it back, or maybe the timing would have been better if you'd have sold it, later. But that's just the nature of the beast.
Right. Well, I was assuming, and I saw a question here, and it was kind of ties into what I was just going to ask. Was they said, have you any art that you've worked on that you would never part with? So I'd assume that some of the artwork that you've produced with different creators, that you just kept it. It's pieces that you probably would never sell or never dream of selling.
So exactly, and that's absolutely true. And I'm not going to be, I won't have the Viking funeral, and I won't be buried with my art. So at some point, everything that I have is going to be sold, whether it's sold by me or sold by my heirs. I'm not quite ready to go down that road yet. I've still got a little life left in me. So yes, so the answer to that question, there is some art that I have that I produced or helped produce that I will never sell, barring being on death's door. One of the things that I mostly stuck true to as well was, even though I'm best known for inking Jim Lee, I inked just dozens and dozens of different artists, and over the course of my career, and especially the first 15 to 20 years. It's only been in the last 10 or 15 years that I've really kind of stuck with Jim more than anything. And I sort of made a deal with myself that if I inked over somebody, I needed to keep at least one example, hopefully a nice example of our collaboration, because most of the people that I was fortunate enough to work with, I was a fan of. So I have like an Art Adams page that I helped ink over Longshot. I have a Michael Golden page that I inked over him on X-Men, and John Byrne and Mark Silvestri, and I just like, all the people that John Buscema, just everybody who I had a chance to do something over. Neal Adams, I would pick at least one piece, and that would go into kind of my permanent collection. And then there's some pieces that I've kept just because I think they're really good. And I'm usually I'm one of the harshest judges of my own work. But every once in a while, things work out, and I'm happy with something. I'm happy with a piece of art that I helped produce, or that I produced myself. I've got a couple of pieces that I penciled and inked, a couple of covers that I penciled and inked, that I'm okay with. It's like, it'll never be perfect, but I'm okay with it. So I'll keep those. So yeah, there's definitely a sense of not everything is for sale that I've worked on. I take great pride in the diversity and variety of artists that I've worked with, and I want to have something tangible that I can keep and look at and hold on to until the bitter end.
Mm-hmm. No, well, so when it comes to selling your work, when you've decided that's a piece I'm getting rid of, you're not worried about ever getting it back. No. It's the ones that you keep that are the special ones. So Brian Peckett asked a question earlier about when it came to splitting the penciler and inker pages within a book. Did you sometimes ask for a specific page because you knew, like, if you were going to keep one, that would be a page you'd like to be able to have?
Yeah, eventually, once I became friends with the artists that I worked with, then yeah, you could build up a relationship and be comfortable to sit down with them and say, let's split this up. But if there's something you particularly want, you can have first dibs on that. Is it okay if there's something that I particularly want? Can I have first dibs on that? And I would do that with a bunch of the artists I worked with, especially in the last half of my career. Early on, Marvel just split up the artwork arbitrarily. You actually weren't allowed to lobby for anything. Couldn't say, can you give the penciler, if I'm the inker, could you give the penciler like these pages so that I can. It's like, no, that's not the way it's going to go. But yeah, eventually we did start splitting up. Sometimes we actually split up whole issues. That was kind of fun. We did that on a bunch of projects. We actually did that on Batman Hush. I think we split up like entire issues, which is cool because you're always going to get like something real. I mean, like assuming you don't completely drop the ball, you're probably going to get some pretty cool pages if it's a whole issue, right? Sometimes if it's just kind of random pages that are split up for a single issue, there's talking head pages and there's just, kind of boring pages to go along with the really good stuff. If you split whole issues, it's pretty cool because it's complete. It has like a cover. You're probably going to get some pretty cool stuff. So we did it that way sometimes too.
Very cool. Very cool. So a couple questions of whether or not you've ever inked Romita Sr. or Wrightson.
Romita Sr. no, and Wrightson no. And they're actually one of the few kind of, legends in the business that I've never inked. And the Romita, the opportunity just never came up for whatever reason. I know Romita tended to ink his own stuff for years and years, but I'm sure there probably would have been some opportunity somewhere. I've inked Romita Jr. a couple of times, but not Senior. Wrightson, I have never inked, and I never would. I've even gotten requests to ink some commissions that either were actually to ink directly over Wrightson's pencils. A few people who had actually like Wrightson pencils, they wanted me to ink over. I said nope. And then some people say, "Would you do a Wrightson recreation?" I said nope. And part of that is he's just always been at. He's one of the sort of the pillars of comic book greats that is sort of untouchable for me, and especially from an ink line standpoint. Nobody inks Wrightson like Wrightson, and nobody should ink Wrightson other than Wrightson. I suppose it's probably happened from time to time, occasionally, where other artists have inked Wrightson to less than disastrous results. But for the most part, Wrightson needs to look how Wrightson looks with his pen and with his brush. And it's not even like a fear. I could probably do something that was serviceable. I wouldn't be embarrassed by it. I just don't think it would look right. And it's funny that one gets brought up because Wrightson is probably the only artist that I can think of that I've been asked to ink where I have no desire, zero. And the irony is it's because I have such high regard for him and his inked line that I decline every single time.
Oh, well, I don't blame you. You would never want to ink over Wrightson pencils anyway. Anybody should approach it that way.
Now that's true. To be honest, the whole thing about the sort of sacred aspect of pencils is kind of a newer phenomenon. It's like within the last 10 or 15 years, it really wasn't a big deal to ink over other pencilers' pencils. Unless it was like something truly historic or truly vintage and important in some way, it just wasn't that big of a deal. Now I think with the advent of blue line inks and wanting to keep, sacred examples of key artists intact, so you can have like perhaps a before the pencil version, and then you can have like the inks with ink version with the advent of digital technology being able to print out blue lines or gray lines or whatever and ink those. You can have like both versions of it, which I get. It makes perfect sense. But honestly, I never got asked to ink copies or vellum or blue lines or any of that kind of stuff until it really started within the last 10 years. So that's kind of a new thing.
Yeah. Well, it seems like people who pick up vintage artworks, that not something new, have that desire that hey, this thing has existed in pencil form only for the last 20 years, and I'd like it to stay that way, but I'd really love your take on it, and so they approach it that way. And that's probably what it is. But 20 years ago, they just got that pencil sketch, they'd hand it to somebody and ask them to ink it, and they wouldn't think twice about it.
Well, don't forget, it wasn't. I mean, it was a long time ago, but remember in the 80s where people would take interior pages and covers and get them colored, the originals, they get like Steve Oliff to go. And I remember like seeing like, Daredevil covers by Frank Miller and John Byrne.
Perez covers. I've seen it all.
I've never seen all kinds of stuff. And it didn't seem crazy or odd to me. It wasn't something I wanted. I would have never done it. It wasn't something I would have spent money on, and I didn't quite see the point, but it didn't seem quite as sacrilegious as it does now. Now it's like, are you crazy? Why would you do that? But back then it was just kind of like a cool way to enjoy, your comic art however you saw fit. And it just wasn't, here's something that will make people go crazy. Even I, as an original art collector, thought little enough of certain aspects of it. So in the early 90s, when we had Homage Studios and Wildstorm, everybody had their own office and their own desks and whatnot. And by that point, I had already built up like a pretty big pile of original art of stuff that I'd worked on. Some of it was, impressive and cool, and I knew, had significant value and fan interest and all that kind of stuff. I wouldn't have touched it. But I had a bunch of stuff from like the days where I was, penciling and inking issues of Power Pack and an old Marvel comic called Strike Force Morituri and some early issues of Punisher and stuff. And there's like a bunch of pages I had with like talking heads and uninteresting characters and pages that, probably back then I would have, if I was going to sell them, if it had occurred to me or if it was worth the trouble, I'd have sold pages for like $5 or $10 a piece or something like that. They were really, like, who cares? And at one point I was like, I would make a really cool collage if I cut up all these pages and paste them all over my drawing area, because from a distance, it'll just look like kind of shapes and black and white images without being anything specific or without showing a narrative, but it'll just kind of look artsy and kitschy and cool. And that'd be kind of fun. I mean, I had like a stack of pages like this tall that it's like, I'll just cut them up and, individual panels or maybe like half splashes, whatever. I never did it. Thank God.
But you thought it.
But I did. I thought about it because it wasn't. I didn't. I had respect for the art. I had respect for the art form, but only up to a certain level. And probably because it was my own stuff. You tend to sort of like devalue your own work more than if it was like a stack of, crappy Frank Miller, Klaus Janson pages. They wouldn't have gotten cut up. But because it was my stuff, it's like, who cares? I mean, from a historical standpoint, and probably to this day, like who would care? But the idea of doing it now, like, is kind of cringy. Like back then, it was kind of like, yeah, I would do that. I even told some people in the studio, yeah, I'm going to do that. And they go, okay, knock yourself out,
Yeah, I'd love a Power Pack page.
Yeah, and I'm glad I have them. I still have them. I didn't, I never sold them, and I never cut them up. I didn't cut them up because I was just too lazy to do it, and I never sold them because back then, like I said, they were like really really cheap, and just it wasn't worth the trouble to sell them. So, but now I'm glad it didn't get destroyed, and I'm glad I didn't sell them.
Right. Well, but the thing is, I'm sure it's happened. I mean, everybody, like you said, they were appreciating the work in their own ways. That's why they would have Olaf color them, and they felt that once they owned it, it was theirs to do with as they saw fit. Which it was a different time. Yeah. I mean, back then, right? You weren't thinking. We look at it today, and we're more caretakers of these artworks.
We are. I do think it matters that all those things that were colored back then were pieces of art that were probably a year or two old at the time, right? So, in other words, if somebody was to take some original art that had been produced in the last year or two today and decided to like color them, I think we'd still like say you shouldn't do that, but it wouldn't seem as sacrilegious or just flat out wrong as it would be if you were coloring a John Byrne X-Men cover or something like that. We'd all be kind of going, no,
right,
just stop.
Right. And I, for me, I think it does, and I would assume other buyers too, seeing stuff like that does make you not want to buy it. I mean, it might limit the people who, I think so. I mean, I've
absolutely
seen.
I think those marked down. I mean, a couple of them have popped up on heritage auctions. There was a Daredevil, a Frank Miller Daredevil cover with Kingpin. And I think that probably went for less than it would have if it had just been pristine. The colors were, detriment. And there's been I remember some of the Miller Wolverine miniseries pages. Some of those got colored, and I see those bumping around in the hobby. And I think they're still desired because of the nature of the story and the art and everything about them. But the color probably, knocks off the interest level and hence the value, frankly, the buying and selling value a bit.
There you go. And Nick Berrucci says Albert owns the Daredevil colored cover.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
I didn't know he had that either, but it makes sense. It was, and if I'm it was a great cover, so I could see why someone would buy it, whether it was Albert or
Oh
not.
yeah.
Plus, Albert's not going to shy away from getting a bargain, and I'm guessing like the color aspect of it probably knocked the price down to the point where he's like going, I don't care if it's colored. This is a cool Frank Miller Daredevil Kingpin cover that happens to be colored, but it's being sold now or it's being auctioned at a fair price. You know, I'm going to make it my own, and he did.
Oh yeah. No, I don't blame him. I mean, at the end of the day, it is the only one.
Yeah.
So, but it's like getting a convention sketch with your name on it. You know, not too many people are going to want to buy a Terry Austin Wolverine sketch that says to Scott, you know, my best fan. You know, they're going to shy. They're not going to spend as much money on that as they would.
Personalizations. But
yes.
again, that's even case specific, because I've got a couple pieces that are signed over to somebody, personalized, and I could care less. I'm so happy to have them because of the nature of the artwork. One's a Jack Kirby Black Bolt Marvel Mania cover. I think it's up in my CAF, and it's great. I don't give a rip that somebody's got his name on there. It's still a great piece of art. And I've got a Dave Stevens cover too that's signed off to somebody, and it's like. Dave Stevens covers are like unicorns, you know, they don't come along very often. This is a great example. The fact that it's signed over to somebody, I don't care. And it didn't affect the negotiations on price. It was a complete non-issue to me. I get it that some people might draw a line. It's like, well, I don't want someone else's name on my art. It's fine if that's a line you draw in the sand. More power to you, but it doesn't bother me if it's the right piece of art.
Right. No, I've seen sketches or commissions that I've looked at that I probably wouldn't buy because it was personalized, but I've also seen other ones that that I would pull the trigger on if I felt I really wanted to have those.
Yeah, literally just imagine your favorite piece of art that you own, whatever it is, and just imagine it happened to be personalized. Would you still want that art and buy that art and own that art? Probably, right? Am I off?
I would think. I'd say definitely if it's published, I wouldn't care at that point.
Right,
You know,
if George
Perez signed it.
Commissions are a whole other. That's a whole other deal. I'm talking published art.
Yeah, no. If it was personalized and it's published, I wouldn't think twice about it. I don't think any collector probably would, but maybe commissions and convention sketches.
That is a little different.
Limits.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
But even then, I've seen some of those that I probably would pull the trigger on just because sometimes they are rare.
And I've drawn and inked tons of commissions, and I can't remember like one person asking me to personalize it. So I think it's not that big of an issue either way.
I agree. Just curious, but everybody, I'm getting comments in the chat about wanting to look at some artwork. So why don't we do a little bit of that?
You don't want to look at my face anymore? I mean.
There's plenty more time for that.
All right.
But here, let's see. I'll do them in the order that you sent them to me too, so that way we can.
Yeah.
All right, here we go.
Okay. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, and it was actually, it was tough to try to figure out like what people would want to look at and what my collection to sort of highlight. So I went with some what I consider big guns, some really important pieces that are, I think, historical and just, creme de la creme, and then some other pieces which are a little bit more under the radar. This is just kind of a little piece of Marvel history. It's everything that I love about original art, and that you could see the creative process, the context within the story. I mean, you had to read the story. I think my wife has looked at this page before, and she's going, "Why is he crying? I don't get it. What, even an android can cry." Oh, okay, but she doesn't have any context. It's an important story within the Marvel mythos. It's John Buscema at kind of at the peak of his power. You could see creative choices he made. You could see like the pencil lines, sort of emanating from the diamond on his chest, where originally the cowl was going to go down low, and then at some point between the pencils and then the ink part of the process, it was like, no, we're going to raise the neckline, and he's going to have like a little cord that kind of holds the collar and the cowl together. It's got an early use of Zipatone that for whatever reason isn't yellowed. I've got a ton of old artwork that has Zipatone that's yellowing, but there are different brands that use different types of adhesives, and whatever this brand was, it didn't yellow at all. So that's cool. And it's just, again, it's contextually, it's just a great moment in a great comic in a great period of Marvel comics. This is key Silver Age stuff within the Marvel universe, and it sets a stage for a lot of the things that we're seeing now in the movies and whatnot. And Vision was always just like a cool character to me, anyways. He was he was a character that had a creator had a character arc, that where he evolved, he changed, and he wrestled with his humanity and his emotions, and those types of themes are pretty powerful. And again, this is John Buscema sort of drawing. It's John Buscema and George Klein, by the way. I do not want to forget the inker. Inkers matter. And
yes,
George Klein was a great inker on John Buscema. And this is a superb example of both the penciler's work and inker's work, and just the moment it captures is memorable. Like I've actually got the page just before this too, so it's a two page sequence. And this is and just from a collecting strategy standpoint, this is a page that reminds me that for anyone who's out there that's actively collecting, it's really good to have some money set aside in case something amazing becomes available. I had a war chest built up, and this and some other pieces of art became available all at once. And I think I was the last man standing as far as being able to buy it, because I was liquid. I actually had, cash is king, and I had the money to be able to offer and pay for it. I basically said, if you will sell me the Vision splash and the first page, I think it came with a Neal Adams X-Men splash. It came with a Bernie Wrightson Swamp Thing page. It was like a package deal. And it was one of those things where it's like, if you'll let me, buy all 4 of these pieces, I will pay you tomorrow. I will send you a cashier's check. It'll be in the mail. You'll have it tomorrow. And those types of things are important when you're trying to strike deals. Again, comic art it's not about money and investing, but it greases the skids. It's what makes transactions possible. You have to have collateral, whether it's cash or other pieces of art to trade, if you're going to add pieces of that caliber into your collection. So from a strategic standpoint, and a piece of advice I would give is, don't always wait to have a piece of art become available and then decide, but then I better sell some other art or secure some funds, because by that time it might be too late. And I know it's not always possible, and this is like a first world problem kind of a discussion to have, but it's, again, just from if you can set aside a little bit of a war chest to have on the ready at a moment's notice, that would be to your advantage.
Right. It's something that has come up. We've had a lot of collector conversations lately where the idea of having a war chest at the ready, or pieces that you're just ready to trade or swap out, is really necessary if you're going to be able to jump at pieces. I mean, it sounds like you had an incredible opportunity there with that set of artworks, and you were probably one of very few people who had that.
And some luck from a timing standpoint. I think I'd happened to have sold some artwork or I just happened to have some money lying around that was I can't wait to buy something, at that. And I know at the time that I bought that piece and those other ones, the mania had fully taken over. I was so into buying art. I was like, anything that's really good that's on my want list, let me add it. And so just from a timing standpoint, I had the cash, and all of a sudden I was presented with the opportunity and I jumped on it.
So did you have the page before that one already in your collection?
It came as part of the package. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Wow.
It came together. Yeah.
What a deal. That's amazing to.
Yeah. Whoever had the pages before, and I know it had gone through multiple owners, had the good sense to have the lead up page to that final splash and kept it together, because it works so much better as the pair from a storytelling standpoint. And I have some artwork framed. If I was going to frame that splash, I would double frame it with, or have 2 frames with the opposing page so that it would read sequentially. You'd have the sequence, it would have context, and then you'd get to finish off with the splash of the vision. And I think that would be the best way to do it. And I think that's how it's been displayed in the past. So whoever was the custodian or custodians of that page prior, and that splash and the page prior, had the good sense not to break it up. So good on them. And I'm not breaking it up either. If it gets sold, if it comes to that point where I'm on death's door, they'll get sold together.
Good. And recently we've seen a few other pieces from that same kind of era where the Zipatone still looks as good as the day it was put on the page, which is weird because I've seen a lot of faded Zipatone.
It's just different brands, because I used to use a ton of Zipatone, and I used there was Chart Pack, and there are a couple different brands, and some of them, whatever the adhesive was, some of them yellowed every single time, and some of them stayed nice and clean and clear every single time. So it's just whatever the formulation was of the adhesive, that made or break the yellowing part.
All right, we're gonna look at some more artwork here.
All right,
this next one is one of my favorites.
Oh yeah, yeah. So this is Jim Starlin. I always forget, is it Strange Adventures or Strange Tales? Anyways, it's 178. It's the first Warlock cover that kind of started the whole Magus and Death of Warlock and Thanos epic that ran right through Captain Marvel books, the Warlock books, and then the Avengers Annual 7, Marvel 2-in-1 Annual. I mean, all those. So anyways, it's just like one epic cosmic storyline, and it's some of my favorite artwork, some of my favorite storylines in the world. From an art collecting standpoint, so much of collecting artwork is hard work and networking and knowing people and all those types of things. I will admit this was dumb luck and a dealer basically just reaching out on a casual, from a casual standpoint, in that I think I'd posted something on the CC message board prior to getting this cover that I was looking for that one definitive Jim Starlin piece. It could be a Captain Marvel piece, or it could be a Warlock piece, but I just want that one great definitive piece that had eluded me, and I didn't give any specifics at all. And within maybe a week or two, I got an email from Sienkiewicz about a cover that Jim Starlin and Mitch had just found in the back of the closet, and it was this cover, and it had been in the back of the closet for decades. And I was the first one to have the opportunity to buy it, and he had happened to have read that email, and he knew that I was a serious collector. It wasn't just like all hot air that, oh yeah, I'll buy something really good, and and then oh no, I can't afford that. I mean, I was like serious. I was a serious collector, and I made it known. And so this was a super rare occasion of just good fortune and the good luck that Mitch reached out to me and said, hey, you said you were interested in a great Starlin cover. Well, what do you think of this one? I immediately said, yep, that's the one. That is the one. And I had him name his price, and he named his price, and I paid it without any hesitation whatsoever. No counter proposal, no nothing. So I'm grateful. And this is kind of a keystone pillar of my collection. I even think it's cool that it's Starlin pencils and inks. I think it's cool that the Warlock logo is just kind of roughed in there. I don't know if they were still in development of the lettering for what would eventually be the Warlock logo. I'm grateful that I have a feeling there's probably a stat of this that, in fact, I'm sure there's a stat of this floating around somewhere. This artwork with the logo that they use pasted on, but instead of it being pasted on the original art, it's just pasted on a stat. On a stat. So I have the good fortune of having as original and pristine an example without all the adulterations from the Marvel bullpen of this incredibly classic cover, and I couldn't be more thrilled.
Wow. Well, so it really does pay to get your want list out there, right?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes it pays. I mean, there's always kind of the debate on whether you should let people know what you want, because they might and try to take advantage of it.
Sure.
It was just an insane moment from a timing standpoint, like that this got found within a week or two of me, putting it out public. Like, boy, I'd sure like a really great Starlin piece, and then this just pops up. It's like, yes, because I mean, again, if something like that had popped up and they decided to put it on Heritage, I might have still come up with it. I might have had to pay more or not, who knows? But I certainly would have had competition. Any way you strike it. I mean, that is one of the Starlin covers to have. And so that was the other thing I remember thinking is like, oh my God, I didn't have to do battle with anybody to get this cover. I just basically had to accept the offer based on an email. Just that's it. So much of trying to get the best art is such a battle, and sometimes it's not a battle in a bad way. It's just there are so many components to it, and you've got a lot of competition, and the people play games, right? And mind games, all kinds of stuff. So it was such a thrill to just have it be so simple and so clean. It's like, yes, that's how it should always be.
Do you mind sharing what year that was that you got it, or around what time?
I'm gonna say 2012, so kind of, I would consider that semi-recent, 2010.
Yeah, in the last 10 years. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Right.
So certainly at a point in time when somebody could have gone to CAF and found 20 other collectors that they could have made this piece available to, but Mitch just went straight to you. So that's amazing.
Yeah. And we've had, I bought some things from him in the past, and I see him at San Diego, so it's not, but we're not like best buddies. He just happened to reach out to me. I think maybe that's, in some ways, that's the sign of a good dealer who knows their customers and knows what their customers like, because one other piece that's coming up sooner or later is a Wrightson Frankenstein plate that I also got from Mitch, which is another thing that he basically reached out to me about. I didn't have any competition on that either. He basically said, hey, Wrightson Bernie wants to sell this piece. Are you interested? And when he showed me the piece, it sent me a scan or asked me to look it up. I think it was in like the Wrightson look back book. Anyways, he said, if this is available, is this something you would want? I said, yes, this is something that I would want. So sometimes it's good to have a dealer who knows what your interests are, but you have to make it known. You as a collector, you gotta be the guy. For a while, I was the Neal Adams guy, because so much of my early collecting and my early interest was Neal Adams stuff. So I would get offered all the Neal Adams stuff, which isn't a bad thing. I took advantage of it like many times, but it was almost automatic. If there was a fresh Neal Adams piece on the market that was looking for a buyer, I would almost always get contacted, because I made it clear that I was paying top dollar for the better Neal Adams art.
Well, I've heard similar tales about Mitch, that he once he's got a good client, customer who's buying art, he's done that to several people in the past, I believe. So it's nice to hear it too, because you don't. I don't know. I know a lot of dealers, they've got that list of people that they know they can go to, so they probably don't just target one person. They're going to ask 5 people at the same time, and then they've got lots of options at that point. So that was really nice. But let's there's a Sienkiewicz here that we're going to take a look at next.
And ironically, that came from Mitch as well. This one had nothing to do with anything other than back in the day, Mitch put out his catalogs, and I included this one because I've got better. Well, I have other Sienkiewicz pieces which I thought about presenting tonight. But this one is from a story called Hit, which is, if you talk to sort of serious Sienkiewicz fans, we all sort of under the agreement that this was sort of the moment that Sienkiewicz started segueing from being kind of like the Neal Adams inspired artist to something different. His approach to the story, the imagery and the metaphors and the pace that he presented this story was something new, and the artwork is beautifully executed and creates just unbelievable visuals. But it was the way that he arranged panels and presented the artwork and the narrative in a way that was different than the issues that came before. And I think it sort of set the stage for what he was going to do on the New Mutants, because this was starting to get near the end of his Moon Knight run. I think he probably has like a few more issues after this, and then he started the New Mutants, and all that New Mutant stuff was, next level. And I think this is where it's kind of began, which was next level. But this was also included in tonight's entries, was because this was one of the pages that I bought from his catalog. I think at the incredible price of $300 in 1980. I want to say 87 or 88, and I really was a struggling, starving artist. I was working professionally at Marvel, but I wasn't making much money. I was making like $40 or $45 a page on inks. That's it. So you're just kind of barely paying the bills on that. But this was such an incredible splash that I got the catalog from Mitch, and it was $300, which I didn't have, but I figured out a way to make it work, and I bought this page, and I'm glad I still have it.
Wow. I mean, $300 is an amazing price, but that was a lot back then.
It seemed like a ton of money back then, and in relative terms, I suppose it probably was, but it's but it was worth it.
No, and that was from Moon Knight 26.
26, yeah.
Yeah, I kind of got turned on to him during Moon Knight, but I was a big New Mutants fan when he took over that's when I was sold on.
Well, you were one of the. I was going to say you were one of the few. You weren't one of the few, but I remember when he took over for Moon Knight, and a bunch of the fans in my local comics store hated that stuff. They didn't get it, and which is fine, because it was a little more off the beaten path, and it did have. It did have a roughness and a sketchiness and an energy that I don't think people were quite ready for, frankly. And I just thought it was just a breath of fresh air. I just thought it was just beautiful. I couldn't understand why anybody wouldn't like it. It made no sense to me at all. But by that time, I was, to a certain extent, Sienkiewicz brought me under his spell in the exact way that would appeal to me, and that he started off really as a Neal Adams disciple, and I was a huge Neal Adams fan. So he kind of got me with the Neal Adams vibe. And it's like, well, this is pretty cool. Neal isn't drawing a whole lot these days, so Bill Sienkiewicz is doing a pretty good job. And then as his style evolved, I just kind of like my sensibilities kind of evolved with it. So he just kind of brought me along. And by the time he was doing this Moon Knight type stuff and the New Mutants, it was like, yeah, this is great. Why aren't you guys getting this? Like, they weren't all brought along the same way. They're just getting this crazy style dumped into a mutant book and going, what the hell is this? So.
Right. I remember first seeing him in it was an issue of like Marvel Premiere with Moon Knight was featured in it. And when I saw that, that's when I was sold. But when he took over Moon Knight, the New Mutants, that's when I couldn't look back after that. But that's when he caught my eye. And for the same reason, here's somebody doing something that I haven't seen in a while that really stands out. And it was so clean, and you're right, it was a little sketchy, but I like that. That was kind of the, that was kind of the style and the underground.
In some ways, it was so appealing because it really was the antithesis of what was going on in the mutant books. I mean, if the mutant books could be sort of defined by John Byrne and Terry Austin that's pretty and clean and slick and polished, and then you've got like this Sienkiewicz guy that's like, street brawler type of an artist that's just letting it all hang out. It was such a great sort of contrast, and it appealed to me, but obviously it didn't always appeal to everyone.
Right. Hey, sometimes it takes a little while. I always talk about
different strokes too.
We're going to look at a Frank Miller piece next. I couldn't figure out Frank Miller initially, and then it took about a year of reading Daredevil before it finally started making sense.
Yeah.
So, let's look at this one.
Okay, so this is Daredevil 173 cover. Again, this isn't my favorite Frank Miller piece that I have, but I still love it, and it's one of the early purchases I made at probably the 1981 San Diego Comic-Con. I got it from Frank's table. He was just sitting there. He had a stack of covers, stack of pages. This was $150 back then, which again seemed like a lot of money to me. And it
Oh, yeah.
was, I mean, relatively speaking, it was a fair chunk of change. And I liked it because it was, it was very actiony. It was, if he'd have had like, the Daredevil 181 cover, or, one of the other Electric covers, or, I would have bought those. But of the ones that he had that were really cool, this was the best of that bunch. And again, this was 81, so you figured this comic was maybe a year old, right? So this is when I was buying it, it was brand new. So not everything that I was buying was stuff that was vintage of my childhood. This stuff had just come out, but the storyline was so good, and the artwork and Klaus's inks were so good that it was just as exciting to buy this as it was to buy something from, Adams or Wrightson or, Kirby or Buscema. And I think when I bought this, I bought a Amazing Spider-Man annual cover of his, again, Frank and Klaus. And I think at this show too, I also bought 3 consecutive pages from him, the Frank Miller and Joe Rubenstein Wolverine miniseries from the last issue, the big fight scene between Wolverine and Yuriko's dad.
Oh, wow.
Which for some very stupid reason I don't have anymore. But anyway, so yeah, I was a huge Miller fan at the time, and still am. And this is, again, something from my early collecting days, which as much art as I have, I don't have a ton from those days that everyone sort of, oh, I wish I had a time machine. I could buy covers for $100 or $150. I don't have a ton of that stuff. I have a few pieces. This is one of them. But again, at the time I was buying this, I was still buying comic books like an idiot. And wish that I'd have spent the money on more original art. But it is what it is, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the pieces that I do have and that I did get.
So what were those the Wolverine interiors going for? If that was $150,
I think they were going for probably $50 to $75 a piece, kind of thing. So I got the 3 pages for $2 or $250, something like that, ballpark.
Right. Wow,
great pages too. They were, and I got them because they had a lot of blacks and a lot of ink. Great emotion, great vertical panel storytelling near the back end of the book. Just great stuff. I wish I still had them, but that's a story for another day.
Oh yeah. Now, I remember around that same time, I went to a Mid-Ohio con, and Byrne and Miller were there, and I wasn't collecting art at all, but I just remember nobody was talking to Frank whatsoever the whole show.
What year was this?
This would have been probably, well, it was right around the time the miniseries had just come out, the Wolverine
okay, so
miniseries.
80, 81, yeah, okay.
Yeah, it would have been around 81, and there'd be like 20 guys around John's table, and not a single person talking to Frank. And I had books. I was thinking I should go get them signed, but I was too nervous and afraid to walk up to his table, especially because he was all by himself. Nobody was talking with him at all.
It's crazy to me, but it tracks, because when I bought all that art from Frank Miller, he was just sitting there sketching. There was no one in front of him, zero. But having said that, the story that I told you earlier about the 1980 show, where I had John Byrne and George Perez and Bill Sienkiewicz. This was the funny thing is George Perez's Teen Titans #1 and Frank Miller's Moon Knight #1 were just coming out like around that show, and they were talking about it. And I think George had one of the first copies of Teen Titans #1. They were showing and talking about it. They didn't have a crowd either. It was like me and 3 or 4 other people that would come by and just kind of watch. I literally got on my knees and parked myself there for hours watching them draw, because it was just it was like magic. It wasn't like a trick. It was literally like a trick is sleight of hand. This seemed like magic, that they were producing these incredible sketches from nothing. There was a piece of paper there, white piece of paper, and then 30 minutes later, there's this incredible drawing, and they were all doing the same thing. And to me, it was like magic. And so I just availed myself to the fact that there were no lines like there are at shows now, where if you have a star artist, there's lines that wrap around, whole sections. So I'm not quite sure. Something changed, and those guys were at the height of their powers. I mean, they were. I mean, the Byrne X-Men books and the Miller Daredevil books were selling huge numbers, but it didn't translate into convention notoriety the way those types of things do now, for whatever reason.
Yeah, well, they're superstars now. That's for
and
sure.
And they were then too, which is what's so crazy.
Right. No, I agree. Well, I don't, maybe it was just in certain ways the way the conventions, how they kind of portrayed them.
I mean, they weren't quite the event that they have become, and there wasn't quite the mania to get things from artists. I just thought it was interesting that these guys who are a resource for inspiration were there, and nobody was availing themselves to this resource. And
right. And I can say back then I bought comics because of the art, and the story was always second for me too, because I wanted to be an illustrator growing up, so I gravitated to books that I liked. I bought the Teen Titans book when they came out, even though I was a Marvel guy. I loved Perez's work, so I felt I had to do it. So so yeah, it was always, for me, it was always art first.
Me too.
All right, here's that Wrightson.
That's the Frankenstein. Yeah. And again, this is, a cornerstone piece in my collection. So it'll be one of the last pieces that I ever get rid of. This is everything that I love about Wrightson. It's actually, to my mind, it's the best kind of confrontations illustrated scene that Wrightson did with the monster and the doctor. And he did a number of them. Because he could never. There were different scenes within the book where there would be a confrontation, and apparently he couldn't get them right. So this was a rejected version, and I know that Wrightson talked about this particular one years later, and the thing that always bothered him the most about it was the monster's right arm. He thought it was like way too long, and I get it. I look at it and it's like I see what he's talking about. But because of the stylization, because of the cloak that's sort of flowing, because of the drama and the raised fist and kind of the menace that it instills in the piece, I don't care if it's technically a bit too long. It's such a powerful piece. Technique is impeccable, and it's everything that should be in a prime Wrightson piece. Just the drama, the dread, the impending what's to come, the technique. Should never be colored because it's perfect in black and white. So yeah, it's my perfect Wrightson Frankenstein. There are a couple of lab scenes, the cover to the book, that I'd probably rather have over this for various reasons. But I mean, I don't spend a whole lot of time thinking, if I only get like this one better piece. This is so good enough for me that I once I had this, okay, I've got that box checked off. I no longer need to worry about a Wrightson Frankenstein.
Wow. And a couple of questions. Somebody wanted to know what year this was from, or what year this one was made, and what is the size of this original piece?
This one's framed. I don't remember the size. I'm guessing, I don't know, 18 by 20, let's say 18 by 20. And it was produced, this one's probably from 1979, I'm guessing. I think he was doing these plates all the way from, I think 77 is the earliest dates that I can remember seeing on any of these plates, all the way through maybe 80. Maybe 81, but I think 80. I think it was basically, it was a long process, and I think it was basically 77 to 80. The real experts out there can correct me, and that's fine. But that's roughly the timetable. And this was absolutely, peak period Wrightson.
Well, without question. So you've always had it framed?
Yeah. It's one of the few. I've got maybe. How many pieces have I got framed? Maybe a half dozen pieces. And I wish I had more framed. No, you know what? I take that back. I've got more than a dozen pieces framed, but it's one of the ones that I've always had kind of near me in my old studio. And when we did a remodel in our house, I thought so much of it that I've actually got it down in the living room. And much to my wife's chagrin, she's like, she loves Wrightson. She knows what the piece means to me. But it's probably not the type of piece that you would expect to be in the living room, for guests to come and like, what the hell is that? But hey, it's my house. I get to make the rules. I call the shots.
Exactly. No, I mean, hey, I'd be happy to have that piece hanging in my living room too. So, as with many people in the chat, I can assure you. All right. Well, now we get to look at an amazing Frazetta piece.
Oh yeah, this is not safe for work piece.
Yeah,
but I'm completely oblivious to that now. To me, it's like, what do you want when it's a Frazetta? You want the Babe and you want the Beast. I didn't get the Beast, but I got the Babe. And this was there was a point in collecting where I thought I would never get a great Frazetta, and then this became available, I think around 2002 or 2003 on Heritage, and there were a couple of Frazetta guys that I knew who would be interested in this piece, and this is the only time where I talked to them and said, would you mind backing off on this one for me? This means a lot to me. And to their credit, they did, or at least they said they did. Maybe they bid me up a bit without telling me about it, but I'll believe them. I'll believe them based on what I bought it for, and I paid a lot for it. I paid well the market value for it, but just the ability to land something like this, which was probably from, I think, in 1964. It's at the same time he was doing the Canaveral plates. I'm still not 100% sure what this was to be used for. I've had a couple people reach out that this was a unused Canaveral plate. It's big. The Canaveral plates are, when you've seen them printed, you have this vision in your mind that they're normal size or bigger, or at least 11 by 17 or even bigger. And then you see some of them and they're tiny. This one's really good size, and so that gives it an even great presence. The ink technique is, it's beyond ridiculous, and it's everything that you'd want in a Frazetta piece like this. There are other Frazetta pieces I would want more than this, but this is the one that maybe go, okay, check this one off the box. This one will last me. This one's good, so I'm happy to have it.
Oh no, that's that was a beauty. And I did check YouTube's rules before posting that one, and they're like, nudity's fine as long as you're using it as an educational and art related thing. So because it
didn't even occur to me that it might be a problem until after I sent it to you. That's a problem.
Well, I made the slide and I wasn't thinking about it, and then as I was uploading the slides into the studio, I thought I better check and see what YouTube says about that kind of thing. And they said as long as it's not it's meant for what we're doing here, talking about original art. They've got no problems with anything that's like that. Good. And how could you have a problem with a Frazetta? At the end of the day, we have problems with people posting artwork that's not very well drawn and is similar, and on CAF, and we have to kick it off the site or make them lock it down. But you see a Frazetta, you would never even think twice about feeling like somebody needs to hide that from their.
Well, some of it is contextual. I remember when I did buy it and I showed it to my wife, and she just laughed out. I mean, she laughed out. She laughed in my face. Like, I know why you like this. It's like, it's Frazetta. I mean, I'm not gonna. What do you want me to say? But she sees those boobs and she just cracks up. She's like, you guys. She knows how we're hardwired.
Right, but it's today. You're so fortunate. I mean, 20 years ago to get that. That was like a great example. And today, when we're looking at if I'm looking at trying to get a representative piece from Frank, I'm more looking at those little 2-inch sketches because I couldn't afford something like that. But boy, you were there at the right time with that piece. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, that was and I went through different stages of collecting, different sort of phases, and that was right during sort of that peak period of my collecting days, where anything that I really wanted, I went after very, very hard, very aggressively. And a lot of my better pieces like that are from that period.
Wow. I mean, that's that. And I know that a lot of these pieces were posted to CAF very early on. So, you know,
Yes.
like you said, it's right in that period when you were really going after these choice artworks.
Yeah.
And now we've got a Silver Surfer 7 page.
John Buscema, Sal Buscema inks, Silver Surfer 7 page. This was, I probably bought this around 2007 or 2008, something like that. This was one of the, for some reason, there were a number of issues that were complete of those early double-sized Silver Surfer books. So issue 4, 5, 4, 5, 6, and 7, they were all complete. And I don't know what the story is. I don't know how much of that is, you know, art that made their way out of the, you know, the Marvel warehouse. I'm not sure what the story was on these, but this book was complete, and the guy who had the book was going to break it up. And again, coming down to relationships, I talked to the guy I knew beforehand what was going down, and there was really only one page from the book that I really, really wanted. This was it. This was the money. This was the money page for me from the entire story. And I have a love for those, especially those first 7 issues.
Oh yeah.
It's just the way that he drew the Surfer and the way that it was inked. And then the size of the issues, they're double size issues. They had something, there was just something incredible about them. And I'm not sure 7 was really my favorite issue of those first 7, but this page from this issue was the one to get. And so I paid kind of a stupid amount at the time. I remember showing it to a couple of my friends, and I think I probably showed it to Albert too. And he said, "How much did you pay?" And I told him, and he just shook his head and goes, "You're out of your mind." You know, and of course now it seems like a bargain, you know, and again, that's part of what the hobby is, you know, money is a consideration. And of course, if you can get it for less, then so much the better, but you're trying to get artwork that speaks to you, that matters to you, that, you know, that hits you at whatever level that makes collecting art, you know, the thing that it is. And this was one of those pages, and I didn't regret overpaying for even a second. All my best art that I have, I overpaid for. I mean, that's just, if you want, I mean, you can get a lot of art that is affordable or is priced fairly. The really good stuff, you're going to overpay for it. And I always kind of joke that I'm happy to overpay for stuff, because that just means I got what I really wanted, you know? So no regrets. I still love it. And actually remember I mentioned that I have the Frankenstein framed up in my living room. I have 3 pieces of artwork framed, and this is another one of them. And this one I actually let my wife, because, you know, I let my wife pick out. I let her flip through my portfolio and said, I want to put 3 pieces up. I want to frame them. I want to mat them so that the frames and the mats match. And I want just 3 really cool pieces. These are the 2 that I picked out. Which piece would you like? And she flipped through my portfolio and she found this one, and she said, let's put this one up. So, and I was like, okay, that sounds good to me. So I've got this. So this one's sitting right next to the Frankenstein.
Well, when it's got your wife's seal of approval, that's a good thing.
That's the way I look at it.
Someone asked in the chat when those issues were complete, was the cover with those 2, or was it just the interiors? Yeah, that's what I would have thought. Yep. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I say that like I know the hell I'm talking about. I don't think the cover was. I know it was with the issue 7, 4, 5, and 6. I don't know.
Not sure.
I don't know. Not sure. I know at one point the cover to 4 and the interiors for 4 were together.
Yeah.
I do know that, for what that's worth.
And I think that was actually the question went by really quick, but I think it was the question was actually about issue 4. So they were together at one point. Yep.
Yes. They may be together now, but I don't think so.
All right, here is another jaw dropper.
So another Bernie Wrightson piece. I mean, there were a couple of artists. This is a Swamp Thing number 3 page. There were a couple of artists that were always my favorite. It didn't matter if it was a Marvel book or a DC book. If Neal Adams drew it, I bought it. If Wrightson drew it, I bought it. If Frank Miller drew it, I bought it. If John Buscema drew it, I bought it. Jack Kirby. I mean, just go down the line. The reason this is something I wanted to show is because I think it's kind of classic in a way, in that it's got the great Wrightson techniques and brushwork and line art, and it's Swamp Thing, which is, you know, kind of his debut, kind of, you know, really coming on the scene and kind of blowing the fans away. But what's cool about this is, even though this character that Swamp Thing is fighting is called the Patchwork Man, it's Frankenstein. I mean, anyone who follows Wrightson's career knows what a huge Frankenstein fan he was, which is what led him to eventually do that Frankenstein magnum opus that he, you know, the portfolio book that he did. So this was just his way of doing, you know, an early version of Frankenstein. And so the fact that I've got the two characters that I think Bernie is best known for, basically Swamp Thing fighting Frankenstein with this great, you know, confrontation and then half splash, like, of them duking it out on the final panel. It's like the ultimate Swamp Thing page, you know, it's the ultimate Frankenstein and Swamp Thing battle. There's just nothing not to love about it. And it's this is actually one of the pages that came with the Avengers 58, Even an Android Can Truck and Cry. Those two pages. This was part of that package deal. So I've had this for a while, and it was great. And again, that's another one where it's like good to have the funds on hand to be able to pull the trigger on that.
I mean, I can't believe that you made a, you know, one man's, you know, lifetime collection purchase all at one time.
It was a relatively small number. It was only like 4 or 5 pieces, but they were really good pieces. You know, so it counts for something.
I mean, yeah. Some people would just
quality
over
quantity every time.
Exactly.
And to be honest, I've never counted what I have in my collection. I don't have a very big collection. I think I guarantee it's less than 100 pieces. I have artwork that I don't consider part of my collection. That's just stuff that I worked on. That's just, you know, artwork over other artists and some of my own stuff. But I don't consider that really part of my collection. The stuff that we're looking at now, that's part of my collection, and it's relatively small, but it's very carefully curated. It reflects my interests and my tastes and what is the most important thing about, you know, collecting original comic art, and it's shown in the representative pieces.
Mm-hmm. Do you find yourself still pulling out the portfolios to look at the pieces that aren't on the wall? Yeah. Yep.
Absolutely. And sometimes, I mean, there are periods that go by where I'm not looking at them as often as I used to, but they're still, it's all still very important to me.
Good. Somebody said I think they were going to turn the thing off if I showed this particular piece, but so we're going to show it anyway and see if they leave.
Oh yeah, yeah.
This is a very rare acquisition. That's for sure.
It is. Apparently, there's not a lot of these out in the wild. I know that he basically bequeathed, you know, the entire run of Calvin and Hobbes. This is Bill Watterson, by the way. Bill Watterson, Calvin and Hobbes. He bequeathed, you know, the vast majority of the artwork to, is it University of Ohio? I don't know. It's someplace in Ohio, right?
The Billy Ireland Museum at Ohio State. Yep.
Right. And I think the only pieces that made it out are pieces that he gifted, and this one was gifted to another cartoonist. And so, yeah, these are far and few between, and it's a little bit different than a lot of the stuff I have in my gallery, from the standpoint that it's, you know, it's a strip art, and the nature of it's a humorous, and it's obviously not superheroes and whatnot, but it's for me, it's the greatest strip that was ever done. Calvin and Hobbes is, and I'm a big, you know, Peanuts fan, and there's other stuff that I read as a kid growing up, but man, Calvin and Hobbes is just one for the ages, and I think it probably holds up as well as it does because he did whatever it was, 10 years, you know, he did his run, and then he got out before he started repeating himself or burned out or whatever. And it's just brilliant. And this one's a very simple one. It's a great gag. I think if you're going to get a daily or even a Sunday, the gag has to be funny. And this one's great and perfectly in line with perfect Calvin and Hobbes. It's got both the characters. It doesn't have some of the great backgrounds that sometimes he would put in, like if there would be like, Spaceman Biff or the dinosaurs, on the hunt, in his imagination or anything like that, where he would go crazy, especially on the Sundays where he had room to kind of bust out his brush and really do like these amazing brush rendered backgrounds. But this is just a great, concise, simple little vignette, and I'm pretty thrilled to have it.
Yeah, I always love the sled riding
strips,
and it really, Calvin and Hobbes really made me love reading, strip the comics, because I really wasn't too interested in them until that strip came along. I mean, I'd read, I don't know, Garfield, that was okay, but Calvin and Hobbes was it. And then and back then my parents got the daily paper, so we were able to see that cartoon all the time, and it was just for that I'd read Sundays. So yeah, it was a really important part of my childhood.
Yeah, without a doubt. Okay, I couldn't not include a Jack Kirby piece in my selections, and this happens to be from my favorite classic Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Joe Sennett, Fantastic Four storyline. This is when Dr. Doom steals the Silver Surfer's cosmic powers in his surfboard and wreaks havoc for a couple of issues. My buddy Jim Lee had the entire story to number 60, all the original art to that, and it was my favorite. It's my all-time favorite Fantastic Four story, and my favorite Jack Kirby art, basically of all time. And part of that is just because of the nature of the work, but part of it was one of those books that I read as a kid that I probably read like 100 times and had a dog-eared copy of it. But just great stuff. And I actually tried to buy it from him at one point. And this was already when it was getting into well into six figures, and I was trying to figure out how I could. And he kind of made it known. It's like I may be selling the art. And I was like, oh man, how do I make an offer that's going to make this work? And I tried to figure out a scenario where I could make it work. And I think I actually did make him an offer for it. It was a fair offer, but he was smart to turn me down. And in some ways, I'm grateful that he did, because I would have had to have sold like a bunch of my artwork to get it. I would have loved to. I mean, I made a sober assessment at the time, and I was willing to do it. But in some ways, it would have been bittersweet, because I would have had to part with a lot of really good artwork in order to make something like this happen. But that said, a few years later, this popped up, I think, on Comic Link, and it's got a great shot. The money shot is the third panel with Dr. Doom.
It is
a close-up shot of that is just it's just one of the great Jack Kirby, Joe Sennett renderings of Dr. Doom. The other panels are fine; they're good. It's all actiony type stuff, and it's got the thing. It doesn't have all four members, but that's okay. The storyline with Doom on the surfboard is kind of the key thing, and that third panel is that's money. So I'm pretty happy to have that. It's not the same as owning an entire issue, but take what you can get.
Yeah, I was going to use that as the close-up image when I was putting the slide together, and I went with Doom on the board because I just thought it was cool.
You can't go wrong. You can't go wrong either way. But that I mean, I know for me that third panel was the kicker. That was the one when I was debating on whether to buy this piece or not. That third panel, that was the decision maker for me.
No, I mean that's a keeper.
Yep.
Right there. All right. So now
large art too.
Oh, okay. I was actually thinking of asking about that. All right. So all those pieces are actually in your CAF gallery. So the remaining pieces we have.
Do you guys want to see like stuff that you don't see as much, or that's not on CAF or not? But it was the decision.
Yeah, I don't know.
Process was. Yeah.
Everybody's really silent in the chat right now. I don't know why. You think that they'd be clamoring for this?
I bored them to tears. Is why.
We've still got about 120 people watching this thing. So I think everybody. Oh, there we go. I finally got a yes. All right, Mark. So Mark Warren, thank you, Mark. Now I guess we will show these 6 remaining pieces because they are not Oh, we got a hell yes now and a stunned silence. All right. So then,
All right.
yes, we will show these remaining 6 pieces. All right, here we go. This first one is Frank Miller.
Oh, yeah. So this is funny that this is a book that I think this is from Lone Wolf and Cub. It's Frank Miller Pencils and Inks. This is from my, artistically probably my favorite period of Frank's work. This is between. Let's see. This is between his work on Ronin and The Dark Knight. This is post Daredevil, post Ronin, but pre Dark Knight, and just the type of drawing he was doing at the time, the ink line. This piece is massive. This is probably the biggest piece of art that I own. I have no idea what it is. This is 24 by 36 or something crazy. It's huge.
Wow.
And I like, again, from a process standpoint, this is again kind of where there's a difference between people who collect original art versus people who collect comic books, and that comic books, like, condition is everything. There's no problems with the condition on this, but you'll notice that all the blades and the blade hilts are all paste ins. So basically, whatever Frank drew originally, he changed his mind, and probably just from a design standpoint, he probably decided or saw some reference that said, oh, that's not how a samurai's blade and hilt looks. It looks like this. So he had it probably all drawn and inked in there, and then changed his mind, and rather than white it out, he just did it on a separate sheet and then pasted it on. I suppose I could light box it and see what's under there, see what the design change was. But to me, that's all just kind of part of the process. I think it's all pretty cool to see the change in artistic considerations that he made, and he did it for all 3 of those swords. There's the guy lying down on the ground, and there's the 2 central guys, and including Lone Wolf, and they've all got the changed out blades. But yeah, I had the poster for this next to my drawing table in the early 80s as I was trying to learn how to draw, and this was a super inspiring piece of artwork for me. And again, kind of like what we talked about with Bill Sienkiewicz, it's a little bit raw. It doesn't have a fussiness or a slickness to it. It's got some interesting line work. It's kind of calligraphic, and it's got interesting line weights. You could tell he was moving quickly, but it's not sloppy. It's not. So in other words, it's done quickly, and there's energy to it, but it's not completely haphazard. He was letting happy accidents happen, but he was still a master in control at the time. And so this was a piece that I had always wanted. A buddy of mine actually bought it, a good friend, and he knew that I really wanted this. And at some point he said, you know what, I need a couple of bucks for something or other right now, and I know you really coveted this. How about I make this happen? And this is actually one of the last pieces of artwork. One of the last pieces of artwork that I bought for my collection. I've definitely stepped back quite a bit in the last couple of years, and seems funny to say it out loud because I feel like I won't get offered anything if people think I'm just completely off the grid. But I'm definitely not. I'm definitely nearer the end than to the beginning of my collecting journey. So I don't buy nearly as much stuff as I used to. And this is actually one of the last pieces that I bought.
So I saw Wes kind of ask the same question I've had. What's the condition issue with the paper? Because it does look a little crinkled.
Very thin.
It's thin. Okay.
There's nothing really wrong with it. For some reason, at the time, he was doing a lot of artwork. I noticed I've got one of his electric graphic novel pages, and that's on fairly thin, like 1-ply paper. So and I took this with a camera, so it looks kind of more, I don't know, crinkly and damaged than it really is. It's just the thin paper shows every little nick and bend and imperfection, but it presents great. It's conditions like not an issue, but
right.
But it's a reasonable question looking at it because if this was like a thicker Bristol board or even 3-ply paper, you'd kind of go, oh man, this thing been through the grinder. It's like, nope.
Right.
Really.
They actually took it out of the trash after he crumpled it. No, it looks like it must be thin. Like I think Ruben mentioned, they're more like pressure marks on the paper.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's so thin.
And they're obviously light creases, but it's highlighted by shadows rather than it looking as if it was, like you said, dumped in the trash and then taken out, 5 minutes later or something like that. Yeah, it's not the case at all.
All right. We got 5 more unseen pieces from your collection here. So let's take a look at another one.
Oh, okay. So this is a John Byrne, Terry Austin Ant-Man piece that I remembered really well from that book that came out in the early 80s, The Art of John Byrne. This was executed when they were still doing X-Men. I'm not a huge Ant-Man fan, but I've actually got some of my favorite pieces of art. In fact, one that's actually coming up is another Ant-Man page. Some of my favorite artists simply do just marvelous jobs with the character. I think it's partly due to kind of his costume and the fact that, when he shrinks down, it creates, cool opportunities for visuals that are unusual. So in this one, you see like the button and the matches and the matchbook and the just the scale and the level of detail. And there's a couple pieces. There's a couple of boxes in my collecting journey that haven't been checked off, and a really good John Byrne, Terry Austin X-Men piece has not happened. And it was partly because just from a cost standpoint, I always seem to be a little behind the curve. I was always willing to like pay a certain amount, and every time something would present itself, the price had gone up, and it's just kind of like going, man, I remember, it's kind of the bad part about having done this for so long is you remember when prices used to be X, and then and then something comes along and now it's Y, and it's like, wait, I remember when it was X. I'd be willing to buy this for X, but now it's Y, and I certainly don't want to pay Z. But it's just kind of those pages have eluded me, and so I would love to get a Byrne Austin X-Men page. But this is a really cool example of the Byrne and Austin art tandem, and it's not exactly a substitute, but it's a terrific example. And it looks, from an original standpoint, it just looks so good. It's just an amazing piece of artwork, just from a craft standpoint. These are 2 artists absolutely at the top of their game.
That's beautiful. Rich asked if the top part was done with razor.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. And well and wonderfully done.
Wow. Yeah, a X-Men page would certainly be on my want list too. But at this point, I'd just be happy. I'd take something from Marvel Team Up, even though that's not Austin Inks. That might be all I'd be able to afford, because even those are getting pretty expensive now.
Yeah, I mean, it's all crazy expensive. And I keep thinking before I keel over, I will get an X-Men Terry Austin page, but we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is Gil Kane and P. Craig Russell on the inks, and this is an example. I'm a Gil Kane fan, but I'm a bigger P. Craig Russell fan, and this was from a series that I loved as a kid. This is probably from about 1974, and this was an example of a piece of art that I bought from a favorite series, but I bought as much for the inks as I bought for the art, because it's from a drawing and layout standpoint, it's pretty much a typical Kane drawing, but the inks I just think are like really cool and have a lot of the elements that I love about P. Craig Russell's work. So anytime I can get an example of Craig Russell's either his artwork or his ink work, I'm pretty into it. And Gil Kane is an artist. I've got numerous Gil Kane examples, but I always buy them based on like who inked it. So I've got a bunch of stuff that Klaus Janson inked, because I'm a huge Klaus Janson fan, and I thought Klaus on Gil Kane was terrific. So I have that stuff, but I have it as much for the Klaus inks as I do for the Kane stuff. I love Kane, but it's how he's inked that seems to matter a lot to me.
Mm-hmm. That's a beautiful cover, and P. Craig Russell, I love his work, and and Kane, I've never been. I don't know if I've seen anything that I'd want to own, but that's great. And I know there's a lot of Kane.
If I was going to get a Kane piece that was mostly purely representative of Kane specifically, he did a bunch of Western covers in the early 70s, which he seemed to have like a great time with us because they're really well thought out, well executed, super inks. All the inks seem to be solid, right? They're not purple, marker faded Gil Kane inks that you see a lot of the time. A lot of Two Gun Kid covers that he did for Marvel back in the day, and I think, and that would be a way to like get a really like choice Gil Kane piece without breaking the bank, right? Because they're probably, you get it, you're not getting into the tens of thousands. You're, getting it for much less. So, a fair amount of money, but something that's manageable. You could imagine doing it, and that would be one where you would get just for the artistry. You wouldn't care. I mean, unless you're a big Two Gun Kid fan, which I'm not particularly. But that would be one where you would be getting for different reasons than if you were buying a Gil Kane Spider-Man page or a Gil Kane, Daredevil page or something like that.
Right. No, I agree with you. I've seen a lot of good Western pieces by him. So, and unfortunately, you're right. That's a genre that is not a lot. There's not a lot of competition there.
No.
All right. So here is the other Ant-Man piece you were talking about.
Yeah. So this is a Neal Adams, Tom Palmer page. This is from my favorite issue of Avengers that Neal drew. This whole sequence is just kind of blew me away as a kid. Again, it's something that I bought off the stands at the age of 11, I think, about age 11. And the whole sequence, for anyone who doesn't know this issue, is Ant-Man actually goes inside the Vision's body. He shrinks himself down so that he becomes kind of micro-sized or smaller. And goes into like fix the Vision, and the visuals, and this was like remember there was like the Raquel Welch Fantastic Voyage movie where they go in a submarine and try to fix a scientist's brain by shrinking down to this, so they get inserted via syringe into the bloodstream, and they have to do
one of my favorite movies growing up.
It's a great movie, and this sort of like harkened back to that. And Neal's visuals on this is cool. You have like the 3 panels on the top, which is kind of I guess you could almost describe it as like storyboards from a movie, because it's a 3 sequence piece that takes place in just a second or two, and you can see the action of what the Ant-Man is doing and how he's escaping these microbes, and then you get into like that great close-up that you've got, which is sort of prerequisite for a great Neal Adams page, because he just draws like these great visuals and the way he draws, super heroic guys. Such a great shot of the innovation that we had never seen in the Ant-Man costume, where it's actually got this plexiglass, way for him to breathe in an environment where there's no oxygen. And then that last shot of him kind of crawling through the tubes, which has got just the very naturalistic, realistic anatomy that Neal was known for, that really wasn't like in vogue at the time, but Neal was kind of pioneering. So it's kind of, again, it's not like, it doesn't have all the key members of the Avengers, but from my standpoint, it's one of my favorite Avengers pages that I have from a sort of a sequence within the Avengers run, and that Kree-Skrull War storyline in particular that is just kind of second to none.
No, it's you can see Neal's run on the X-Men was at the time, I think people just didn't know what to make of it, but he did some amazing work in that, and you can see that it's around that same kind of feel to that.
Yeah.
And I just think people didn't know what to make of it. At the end of the day, I mean, I would have loved to have seen him do more do more work on the X-Men or more work on the Avengers.
You and me both, brother. You and me both.
All right, we got 2 more pieces to look at, and this one it got your hands on it.
Yeah, I figured I needed to throw one in. I mean, everything that I collect, I'm definitely all the artists that I collect, I'm a fan of, and don't tell Jim this, but I'm actually a fan of his too. And so, if it wasn't for the fact that I work with him as much as I do and have as many examples as I do, I'd still be a fan, and I'd still want to own his originals. So, I mean, I'm in the fortunate position to have a few that I've held on to, and that I'm it's kind of a snapshot from a time in my career, and a time in Jim's career, and a time in fandom that means a lot to me. And this is a good example. I mean, I suppose if you're, unless you're going to get like a classic team shot, getting a nice Wolverine at his most savage, his most feral is probably the way to go. And this is certainly that against the Omega Red Nemesis. And it's just very dynamic, and the inks are okay. I mean, there's some inks that I did on X-Men that I think are hold up really well. This is kind of middle of the run. I think the inks are fine. I don't have a huge problem with them. There's nothing that's jumping out at me that I wish I had done like totally different. But it's like one of those things where I'm really happy that I held on to some of this stuff. And Jim he's just a damn good artist, and I get to see it at so many levels and in so many iterations that I have an admiration for his work that maybe some of his biggest fans don't even have, just from the standpoint that I know what he puts into this stuff, and I know how consistently good he is, and how many different gears he has. So I felt like, I'm not gonna fool anyone into thinking that I put this in for self-serving purposes. I put this in because, Jim's, along the same line of thinking that I'm talking about Buscema and Wrightson and Barry Smith and John Byrne and Frank Miller. I mean, Jim's right there with them. So I think he belongs in a serious collection.
Well, no question there. I mean, and this was a perfect example for you to show, I think, because this is when Jim made his really made his mark, made his career,
No doubt.
He set himself apart from so many other creators, at the time.
This stuff is really, I think it's kind of been reignited when Scott Doombeer and IDW debuted the Jim Lee X-Men Artist Edition recently.
Yeah.
That created a huge buzz that I was, very keenly aware of, because I get emails and mentions in my social media, and just people love that stuff. And I mean, the 90s art and 90s pop culture in general is pretty hot right now. And it's because people are aging out at the point where they were, when they were 11 and 12 years old when this stuff was coming out. They're all in their 30s and 40s now, and this stuff is meaningful to them, and it's at a point where they want to recapture some of their youth, and have huge nostalgia for this. It makes me feel incredibly old, but that's the nature of the beast, I guess, to know that all the kids who are buying this off the stands with their allowance money are now parents themselves and whatnot. But I'm honored to have a place in their memory that something is important to them.
You're living the dream, Scott, to have that happen. I mean, but you were working at a very interesting time in comics history, at that point. And so, no, I mean, we've all been talking about it on the show a lot, that the 90s are really the hottest thing going on right now as far as the comic art market. You're seeing covers from the 90s sell more than Kirby covers, from 20 years prior. It just doesn't make any sense, but it's happening, and it's happening, not just like 10% more. We're talking 100% more than Kirby covers. So it's really. I think it's a normal cycle, and I think like 10 years from now, all the stuff from the early 2000s is going to be what the 90s is now. I do think there's a 30-year sequencing that seems to happen, where the people who are into this stuff, it's at a 30-year designation, the juices start to flow, and the memories start to come back, and they get reminded by something that they see on social media, or the artist edition comes out, and it's like, oh, I remember when I used to love comics, and this was it. And people from either before or after that time go, yeah, it's all right. I mean, I don't know what the big deal, but if that was your time, then it's important to you, and I get that. I totally get it. In fact, I think, what's the next piece? Let's see if I can tie this in. Well, the next piece, there was speculation what the last piece would be, and no one will be able to guess this piece. So
no. And this is it. So this is something that I bought off the stands when I was 12 years old, and this is Mike Ploog from the very first Ghost Rider. This is Marvel Spotlight #5, and I love the story. I love Mike Plug. I read this comic over and over and over again, and this comic means a lot to me. And why? Because I think it's cool art, but I do think you probably had to grow up with this or appreciate it at a certain point in your life. And I was 12 years old, and this artwork meant a lot to me. I remember copying the close-up that you showed there of Ghost Rider's face. I remember drawing that in my sketchbook like numerous times just because I thought it was so cool. And I still think it's really cool, but I'm so invested in it from a nostalgia standpoint that it's hard to know where that ends and where the actual craft begins. But I'm not going to apologize for it. I think it's a cool story. I guess now it's turned into like key comics. So like Marvel Spotlight #5, the origin of Ghost Rider. His first appearance is, from a comic book standpoint, is a hot book. I kind of don't really care about that. I just love the fact that it's his first appearance, that the way that Mike Plug draws him is really cool. It just pushes a lot of buttons for me that I admit is probably not going to hit everybody else quite the same way. But if you're of a certain generation, this is cool stuff.
Recently, probably about 3 months ago, Berkey had 2 pages or maybe even 3 from this book, and he said, guess how much, what they would go for, and my guess was about a third of what they went for. I just said, I had no idea. So this is a very, it's a sweet spot for a lot of collectors from that era, and this particular issue is incredibly sought after. And I felt stupid. I thought I was giving him a nice high price, and he said no. And when he told me,
I don't even know what they go for. And the I have that page, and I have another page from that same issue, and I got them both from Berkey, by the way, quite a number of years ago. But I have my examples. I'm sure I would take more, but I don't really follow the market, so I actually have no idea what they'd go for either. It doesn't matter. It's not really the point. But the point is I didn't buy them for any reason other than just pure love and the nostalgia, and the fact that it was Ghost Rider's first appearance was a bit of a bonus, but it's not really that wasn't the point. It was just the right time and the right story for me. So
no, well, there's a lot of guys that focus on first appearance issues, and so that's I think that's a big part of it, but that that period in Plug's career is some of my favorite work. Exactly.
I think I consider him underrated. Maybe he's not, but because he worked on a lot of books that people really love, and this one's obviously one of them, and valuations probably bear that out. But in a lot of ways, he's underrated. And the funny thing is it wasn't until side story. It wasn't until years later that I really started to appreciate Will Eisner's work, and I started realizing, wow, Will Eisner kind of draws a lot like Mike Plug. No, Mike Plug was Will Eisner's assistant, so he draws like Will Eisner. But I was blissfully ignorant of Will Eisner's work, until long after I'd already been introduced to Plug. So I love both those artists for different reasons, but they're both brilliant.
I completely agree. Well, we've hit the 2-hour mark, Scott. I had a feeling we weren't going to have a problem reaching 2 hours.
That works for me.
It works for me too. I hope everybody in the chat has had a really good time. You've got the interview that you guys have been waiting for, so I'm really happy that we got to do this, Scott. Seriously, it's a pleasure, and I can't wait to get to San Diego, and I'll actually get to see you in person. I'll make sure because I'm sure I've walked by your table, but whenever I see a line, I tend to just kind of go walk by, and I figure I'll see that person the next time I walk by him, and it hasn't happened yet, but. No, I look forward to that day. And again, everybody, I sincerely appreciate you guys tuning in. We had a fantastic crowd all night. I think there's probably been at least a couple thousand chats that went on during this thing, because people were interacting a lot throughout the whole thing this evening.
I'll go back and check out the questions on the YouTube and see what I missed.
All right. Well, again, you got to wait a day because they don't post the chats. It's some weird thing probably where they're checking it to make sure there was no no
nothing
said
panky.
that they want to hide. But
Right.
anyway, I appreciate it, Scott. If there's ever anything I can do for you, just let me know. I don't hold it against you that you haven't been super active on CAF, of late. I mean, that's okay. I mean, everybody's, the time you have is the time you have. And if you don't, and if CAF's not in there, I don't mind. But if there's ever anything I can do to help you out, or if you ever need anything, just let me know. And again, thanks everybody for tuning in. It's been a fantastic show. Yep. And
thanks for having me. Appreciate it very much.
Yep.